So from our previous video, we looked at taking the input from a user and displaying it in the report view. We also learned how to import a namespace. So we're using the Qt GUI or Qt GUI from the Pi side. We're importing that and we're using the Q input dialog to get the text from the user input. So as we said before, this is a blocking command. So this is waiting for a user to input something, and then when that's inputted, it's placed into the user input value there. And we'll just run that. So I'm going to get my report view up so we can see the output. And we'll just go to macro and execute macro. So it's asking me for the user input, enter a value. Please enter a value, so you can see those there. And enter a value. That gets piped into the user input variable, and the FreeCAD.console.print message outputs what's in user input value to the report view. Now, how can this be useful in our everyday programming with FreeCAD? So when we're creating a macro, well, let's create a new document and go over to the part. And I'm going to place a cube in here. And what I want to do is affect the position of this cube. Now we can do that by using the Python console. So let's bring up the Python console using View Panels Python console. So we've got that here. Let's clear this out. Now, before we was using the dot notation to import namespaces. Because everything's in the namespace, then we use dot notation in the Python console as well. We covered some of that during our last tutorial. So to pick up this cube, if you look down the bottom left here, it tells you what name it is. So we can actually pull that from memory and use it in a variable. If we're assigning it to a variable, so I'm going to say, well, the cube, actually the internal name is called box. So I'm going to call it my box. So this is just a variable. We can call it what we want, equals. And then we need FreeCAD dot, and there's dot notation coming in, active document dot. Now we've got a choice here. We can use active object, so whatever object that's active, or we can call it by name. And we can call it by name by get object. And this one here, let's give us a bit more space. There we go. And in there we pass the name of the object, so in double quotes or single quotes, whatever ones you want to use, but keep consistent. And we're using this internal name here, so box. So what that does when I hit enter, if I type in my box now, that will actually print the contents of what that is. So it's actually a part feature. So now we've got that in there, we can get to the stuff like the placement and the length, width and height just by going my box dot height, and we hit enter, and that comes up 10 millimeters. If we look down here, we can see the length and the height are 10 millimeters. So we can affect that by typing in my box dot height equals 20, and that's pulled that out. So we're looking at here, we're looking from the top down. So we're looking from the top down. So look from the front, that makes it a little bit easier to understand. So let's increase the height. So we can place that back. I've just pressed the up arrow. If you wonder how quickly I type that, just press the up arrow in here. That recalls the last command, and set that to 10. So we've changed the height of that box by setting its property. So we could use that in the macro. So our current macro we've got, what we'll do is take the input and set my box.height to the height that we specify from the input from the user. because we're gaining the input from the user, so we're going to use it in something. So we use the same process, so I can press up arrow a couple of times to get back to where I was. So I want that one, mybox.freecad get object. That sets the object. Remember, we're in a different space here, so this is the current scope of what's going on in our document at the moment. If we run in this, then my box won't be available in my macro because we haven't defined it in there. This is running in a separate space in memory, so we've got to pull that in and redo that. We can't share variables across the Python console and the macro because they're two separate things. So I've got my box, so let's sort that one out. And we want to set my box height. Now there's a problem here, and this is where we're going to get into types as said in the previous video. So we've got our user input, and this user input I'm going to say this is called my new height, and I don't want to output it to the console. I just want to change my box dot height equals that user input. So if I type in a 12 in there, it should equal 12 millimeters. Now that will work to an extent. So the 12 will take, even though it's a string, because that's quite an easy conversion to make, and Python/FreeCAD will do that automatically for you. And I can show you that. Go in macros, execute macro, and let's type in 12. Okay. And we'll go back, click on this, and you can see that height has changed to 12. But what happens if we times that by, say, my height, times it by 10, or times it by 3? So my new height times by 3. Like so, my new height equals my new height times by 3. If I execute that now, and we'll use 1 in there, hit OK. Look at what happens to the height. It's now 111. Well, it's times that amount by 3, but because it's a string, that is actually valid, because what it's done is taken the string and put 2 more on the end of there. So it's created 111. If I execute that again, and say 3, then that'll turn to 333. So we have to be very careful here. If we converted that to a float, then we wouldn't get that problem. So let's change this now. So I'm going to cast this, so my new height equals this time float my new height, and then times that by 3. And then when we execute that, so 3 in there, you can see that equals 9. So that's exactly what we want. So we have to be really careful there, because certain operations on strings are actually valid. So times by 3 will place actually three characters in there, but won't times the numeric value inside. So this is where we get into types. Now we can explore types by doing some type exploration down here, and I'm just going to make this a bit bigger so we can see what we're doing. So my box at the moment is defined. If I do a type on my box, the words type and my box, you can see it's a primitive py type. It's coming from FreeCAD, so it's part of FreeCAD. Now Python itself has types. It has a number of types, and the main ones we're going to be using are a type of string. So if I do type on that, and that is characters, so that's a string. And the other one is type of float, so these are floating point numbers. So do a type on there, that is a float, and there's another numeric in there called an integer, so a equals 1, and they're whole numbers, so I haven't got floating points in or decimal points. So we do type on a. We've also got complex numbers, which we won't be going into really, and then we've got such things as collections or sequence types, and those are tuples and lists, and those are a collection of types. There's list, tuple and range in there, so if I did this, a equals, and in bracket 9, and then we'll put a string in there as well, and a float, that's a collection. So if I do type a, that will be a tuple. And tuples are important because vectors are normally kept in tuples. Vectors are actually part of FreeCAD's own types, and underneath they're actually a tuple, X, Y, and Z. And with tuples, they have an index, and so does a list. So a list is defined by, let's do B for the list, or L. L equals, and an open square bracket, and H5 9.1. I do open and close those square brackets. So I do type L. That's a list. Now these are similar in many ways, but they have one difference, one main difference, and one's something called mutable, and the other one is immutable. A tuple is immutable, meaning it can't be changed. A list is mutable, meaning it can be changed. The only way to change a tuple is to overwrite the whole lot. They also got index-based values inside, so you can get to them via an index, and the index is 0-based. For instance, if I put my tuple a 0, that's the first item in the index, and the same with L0. So you can see L0, H, A0 is 9, and that goes up to 2 because there's 3 items in there. You can have more than 3 items, so A equals, again, a tuple, 1, 2, etc. So A5 will be 6. If I do A6, then I'm going out of range. So index out of range, because I've gone out of the range of the index. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, when I said about tuples being immutable, so A0 equals 0. Tuple object does not support item assignment. So that's immutable, so it cannot be mutated or cannot be changed. If I did that with the list, so L, let's do the first one, which was H, L0 equals 1. If I do L0, then you've got 1 there. The Python console is a great way to explore the language. You can get used to the language without writing macros and then executing the macros and seeing what they're doing. You can quickly plug away at the different commands and see what happens. There are a number of other types in there. There's Boolean, which is a true or false. So if I did A equals true, typed in A, that's true, or A equals false, and A equals false. They only can be true and false, so on and off, 0 and 1. So that is a switch, it's either one or the other. So if I did H equals 5 and H greater than 5 is false. If H smaller than 5 will be false. H equals 5. Sorry, H equals 5. That's true. And then I can say A equals brackets H equals 5, and that should be true. So that's another type, Boolean value, true or false. There are many other types in there. There's set, frozen set, I believe. There's a mapping type, which is a dictionary, which is a key value pairs, which allows you to assign a value and give it an index of whatever you want. There's binary types for bytes, bytes arrays, I think something called memory view. But we'll be mainly going through the types of, well, mainly using the types of float, integer, boolean, string, and vector for this one. Also the tuple, because vectors are tuples. So what do I need to do to actually allow me to change the position of this? Well, I need to use the placement in there. So my box.placement.base, which will come back as a vector and starts with a bracket, so we know that's a tuple. So we've got a tuple inside there, a tuple of floats. So we need to pass in to our user input an X, Y, Z position if we're going to use that to move something. So my box.placement.base equals, and I'm going to use my vector in here, and we're going to assign that to something in there. So my vector is in here. So I've got to make this a tuple, and I've got to get this out of this value here. So I've changed this to val, and that's going to be the value from the input, and I'm going to use a comma separated input in there. Now if I use a comma separated input, I'm going to say a equals, and we're going to say 1, 2, 3. Then normally when you do conversions, so if I add a equals 1, then if I show a there, it's currently a string. If I did float a, that will convert it to a float, so you can see it's 1.0. If I did int a, that will convert it to a 1. The same if a equaled 1.0. If I did a 1.0, if I did str a, then that's 1.0 in quotes, so it's string. But what happens if we've got a string of 1, 2, 3, so comma? So I would put that in my input. Can we do tuple a? Well, let's see what happens. It's kind of worked, but it's taken each of these values and put them as a tuple. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's taken the commas as a value, which is not what we want. So we can see that FreeCAD a equals FreeCAD. If I did a there, it's FreeCAD. If I did tuple a, then that come out as FreeCAD. Each of those characters separated out. And if I did list a, then we get FreeCAD, but we got square brackets instead. This one can't be edited, this one can. Immutable and mutable. So we need to somehow, if our input is a equals as a string 1, 2, 3, we need to figure out a way of splitting that on the comma. Now there's a clue there, splitting on the comma. If I did a.split, that is a command. That's a string command. You can see a number of string commands there. R-strip, so right strip, right split, right partition, right just, right index. A number of them in there. So we've got a number of different commands there. And you've got the L just and the L strip there. So if I did a split, and if I defined what I'm splitting it on, then we get a list. And if I did tuple a dot split, and then use that, we get that list converted to tuple. So what we've done is converted a, split a on the comma, and then that's brought back a list. You can see here that's a list. So if I did a dot split and place that into type, that's come back as a list. I know that's a list because it's got square brackets. This is defined by square brackets, tuples defined by normal brackets. So we can use that by using tuple a split. So this command here. So my vector equals that, and my box.placement. Now we know we've got a FreeCAD dot vector, and we can define FreeCAD dot vector. So a equals the vector, and in there we've got to place a tuple to 3. So a now equals a vector of 1, 2, 3. So all we need is my vector equals tuple a dot split. That, so now that's currently a tuple. But at the moment I've just put that in there. I forgot a is no longer 1, 2, 3. There we go. So that should work now. So my vector is a tuple, and of course we don't have to worry about these because they'll be converted anyway. But for completeness we can do that by specifying the individual parts, but I'm not going to do that. There's no need to. So we need to change this to val because our value comes in here, and we need to place my vector. I'm going to call this my tuple, and place base equals FreeCAD dot vector, my tuple in there. So look at our placement. Let's bring this back down now. Here's our placement. Open it up. Position at the moment is 4, 5, and 6. That's 0 these, 0, 0, and 0. And if we run this, let's go over it, see what we've got. So we're pulling in the value from what we've called from the user. That gets piped into value. My box picks up the box from the scene. So this is my box, which is unnamed .box.edge. So it's there, we can see it's the box. So my box equals get object box. My tuple equals tuple. So we're casting the val.split, which is coming in from the value. Split it on the comma, x, y, and z, comma separated. Convert that to the tuple and set that in my tuple. And then my box.placement.base is a vector, and we're just using FreeCAD.vector and creating a new vector in there, passing in my tuple. Let's see what happens. So 1, 2, 3, hit enter, and you can see that's gone 1, 2, and 3 there. And that would have moved it. So if we execute that again, 10, 20, and 30, see 10, 20, and 30 there, and it's gone off into the weeds somewhere. There it is. And there you go. So that's a quick introduction to types. As I said, there are other types that are there that we'll get into when we cover them. For instance, the byte array or the bytes there, I have actually done something with FreeCAD with that, with taking external data and converting that via the byte array into FreeCAD. And when we come to it, we will come to that in the tutorials, and I'll show you how to do that, and we'll go back to the types and go through those types. But we just need an idea of what types we've got there and the main types that we're going to use. So that's that for that video. We'll come to such things as operators in our next video and how to use those. Next Python video will be out on Scripting Sunday. If I've got anything Python wise, I'll show you that as well. So that'll be in another video as well on the same day. Throughout the week, we'll look at modeling. So modeling in FreeCAD. At the moment, I've got a Curves Workbench mini-series that's running. So if you want to have a look at that, and that takes you through all the different functions in the Curves Workbench and how to use them. And that's going to be running throughout the week and off into the next weeks as well. It'll be chopping and changing to other workbenches as well, or other functionality of FreeCAD, but we'll be mainly looking at the Curves Workbench for a little while to complete that mini series. So I hope that helps. I hope you're enjoying the channel, and I'll see you again. If you like what you're seeing, please subscribe to my site, and also I have a Ko-Fi site where you can actually donate a few pence or a few pounds, dollars, or whatever your currency is, and that's at ko-fi.com/mang0, and there you'll be able to help me fund my site, and all the money that I actually get from any funds will actually get pushed back into the channel. Thanks a lot for watching and subscribing. I'll see you next time.